This is the second in a series of 4 talks looking at our shared values: encounter, adventure, renewal and generosity. Last week we looked at encounter, so this week it is adventure. And I think we should start by asking a really simple question: what is adventure? What do we mean? And I've thought about this and I've come to the conclusion that there are 4 things that are needed for something to be considered an adventure. First, there has to be risk. If it's totally safe, if nothing is in jeopardy, it's not adventure. I mean, in some ways that's the entire meaning of the word. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, people say, don't they? So there has to be risk. Secondly, there has to be a quest. An adventure without a goal or an end isn't really an adventure, it's just a series of exciting or scary happenings. How can you tell when you've reached completion, when you've reached safety? How do you know when it's done? So risk, quest. Thirdly, there has to be change. If you have an adventure, it changes you and it changes the world around you. Maybe just in a very small way or maybe in a much larger way. Maybe you become more courageous or more compassionate or more humble or more proud, I suppose. You might become more influential or powerful. You might become better known. You learn things, and not only are you changed, but things around you are changed by your actions. The ring is destroyed. The smugglers are caught. The boy trapped down the mine shaft is rescued. The source of the Nile is discovered. The people who've lived at the source of the Nile for thousands of years before that are noticed and given their due place in history. I think that's an ongoing adventure. But there is change. Otherwise, it's not worth telling. And it probably wasn't worth the risk. So risk and quest and change, and fourthly, and really importantly, reward. Part of that change needs to be reward. Remember, nothing ventured, nothing gained. An adventure is always embarked upon for some sort of gain, whether that's for you or somebody else. So that's what I think the idea of adventure is, as we find it in culture, in history, in our society, in our human makeup, I think. Why would we as a church particularly value adventure? And what does it have to do with our vision to be on the roads together where the river flows? We need to ask, do those characteristics of adventure hold true as we look at God's story and the story of God and his people? Do we find adventure in Scripture? Is adventure something Jesus would do? Well, let's have a think about just our passages this morning. Risk. Is it there? Well, yeah, it's definitely there. The people entering the promised land risked their very lives. And the disciples left everything to follow Jesus into an unknown future. There is definitely risk. Is there a quest? Well, yes, I think there is. God's people had been told that they were to live in this land and that they were to be God's people, showing God's ways, blessing the whole world. That's a quest and a half, isn't it? And the disciples were catching fish, and then they were told that if they followed Jesus, they would be catching people. Is there change? Yeah. God's people had to become brave to enter the promised land. They had to become more obedient. That took 40 years. They had to move from nomadic life to settling in a new place. They had to build and they had to plant. And the disciples, Jesus' friends, had to go. They had to move. They had to listen. They had to learn. And in the end, they had to wait for God's Spirit to change them from the inside out. Reward? Well, yes. For the people of Israel, the reward was the land. But more than that, if they could understand it, which they mostly couldn't, and perhaps God's people still don't, God's presence and the privilege of sharing that with other people. And for the disciples, the reward was God's presence in Jesus, Jesus himself, and sharing it with many others, many others. Notice briefly, harking back to last week, that these adventures only happened after encounter. God's people only entered the promised land because God spoke to Joshua. They were only in the desert because God appeared to Moses and made his power known to Pharaoh. They were only in Egypt because God spoke to Joseph, and so on. And the disciples only went on the adventure that they went on because they had met Jesus and seen what he was like and what he could do. They'd been amazed by his power and his knowledge. They'd tasted his goodness. They'd heard his invitation. It happens after encounter. But back to adventure again. The following advertisement once appeared in a London newspaper. It said this: "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful." The advert was signed by Sir Ernest Shackleton, Antarctic explorer. How many respondents do you think it got? Amazingly, thousands. Thousands of people responded to that advert, and safe return doubtful turned out to be an understatement. Is that what adventure as a Christian is like? Well, the type of adventure we're on, it's just as risky and as hard and as materially unrewarding as Shackleton's ill-fated expedition. But the one thing we cannot say is safe return doubtful. Because our adventure is just one chapter in the big adventure that's already been written. As we adventure, we're literally living Christ's story, which is our diocesan vision in the Diocese of York. Jesus took the ultimate risk, in fact knowing that he would lose everything. He did it for the ultimate quest, to save the world. He changed. God changed. He became flesh. He felt pain and hunger and laughter and tiredness and sadness and touch, and he gained the ultimate reward. You do know what that is? It's you. It's us. He already had everything else. That's a different sermon. Jesus is the great adventurer. Jesus is the one hero. And that's one element of adventure that I didn't mention earlier, because we'd get ourselves into the long grass worrying about how many heroes you can have, and whether hero is a sexist term anyway, and what to do about it if it is, and whether you can have a non-hierarchical adventure with no heroes. I'm mentioning it now because regardless of those questions, I want us to understand that in our Christian adventure, in the kind of adventure we're choosing to say that we value, in that adventure there is a hero, and there is only one hero, and it is Jesus. We adventure as his friends, his companions, his hindrances sometimes, his imitators, his representatives, but he is the one and only hero. The risk has been taken, the quest has been completed, the change is unstoppable, the reward is assured. It may be just people of my particular age, but I wonder if any others here, or where you are watching this, remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books. I hope I'm not shattering anyone's nostalgic childhood memories, but I did not like them. They were not satisfying. You read the book and then every now and again it would give you a choice and you turn to a different page of the book depending on what choice you made. But I never found them satisfying because it never felt like there was a plot. It never felt like there was a grand scheme. And once you realised how the books were put together, you realised that you weren't really in control like they wanted you to think. You were just in some sort of book maze. Following Jesus beats that on two counts. Number one, there is a grand plan and Jesus wins, along with all those who put themselves on his quest. But number two, in that quest also, there are real, genuine choices that make a difference to us and to those around us. And when we get it wrong in our Christian adventure, it's not like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, where you end up going into a cave and getting eaten by vampire bats, or falling into quicksand, or discovering that the mysterious stranger with whom you've gone into the jungle is actually a cannibal in disguise, or whatever other ridiculous death scenario the book has come up with. When we make a mistake, we have a God who still weaves that into the one big adventure with the one big happy ending. Does that sound better than Choose Your Own Adventure? There is just the one hero. If we undertake our own adventures, we will come to grief. But if we follow him, we can make our choices, we can make our mistakes, and the reward is still assured. Safe return guaranteed. Hopefully that's helped us to understand what kind of adventure we're saying we value and what Christian adventure is and why we value it. But as always, we need to ask, well, so what? What does it mean in practice for us to value adventure? There are going to be some questions on the screen and some time to talk about them. Thanks for listening.